Welcome back, Mobile Home Park Nation. Ferd here again today with another episode. My guest today is a unique guest for you guys. He's going to help you do your due diligence. He's going to help you save money. He's going to help you preserve your assets. He does asset classes like retail, office, industrial, but he also works on mobile home parks. He's going to help us understand asphalt in particular and road work. Please help me in welcoming our guest, Scott Jolly. Scott, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I love your podcast. I've been listening to it since you started it. So I was like, I think I got something to add, maybe help out.
Well, you're my first guest here talking about CapEx. So you're definitely got a unique niche. Tell us a little more about your background and kind of where you operate and what your role is in the process.
Yeah, sure. I have a great short story in the industry. Like my grandfather was a bricklayer. Some of my first jobs in my life, my first job was mixing mud and carrying bricks and pouring concrete for my grandfather, like 12 years old. So poured my first house foundation, which is a post and pier foundation, not too dissimilar from MHPs sometimes, and in Mississippi, actually, and down in the South. And so that was when I was 17. I started my first real estate investment company when I was 24, and I got my serious butt kicked in the 2008 recession. Went and decided I wanted to learn a little bit more, got into paving, did paving and concrete, worked for a company in Southern California for 6 or so years, was pretty successful, and kind of actually got asked by a lot of clients we started traveling for my local clients around the country to do consulting for them. Like, hey, we want someone in Denver and Seattle. And so I wasn't the contractor, but I was a consultant. And then I decided to go out on my own. A few years ago, our vision is to be a full nationwide capital expenditure consulting firm. We do focus on, in the commercial real estate world, which can be considered the big three, which is HVAC, roofing, paving. We are also now, clients are asking us, we're doing an Amazon tenant improvement. We're doing some other larger capital expenditures for TIs and like total property transformation. So that's who we are. I've been doing this now full time. Started the company about 5 years ago, but full time for the last 2.5 years.
Great. Yeah. Great. So I know from talking to you previously, you're more of an owner's rep. So you represent the owner, whether under due diligence or whether the actual owner of the property, and you kind of like a construction manager. You're overseeing the contractors. You're vetting bids. You're vetting vendors. You're making sure the bids are apples and apples and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, we actually like to give owners a lot more control, where we actually write the bid packages. So instead of collecting bids and making sure they're apples for apples, we define the specifications so that I think the process that I see a lot of owners or managers, whether asset manager or property manager goes through, is let's go talk to contractors and get bids and then see what fits our budget or see what we need, versus we're actually 100% backwards from that. Right. We like to understand what the asset strategy is, what the budget is, what they could look at. And then we go to the property, evaluate what the needs are and say, okay, these are some recommendations. This will last this long. This will last this long. And so we actually write the bid packages. We're not a general contractor, even though my business partner has his general A engineering license. So he is allowed, in the state of California. We're working on getting that in other states right now, but can build bridges and do utility work. And he's very knowledgeable and that kind of work as well. So we write the specification for the owners and then go collect bids. And then we find contractors and vet them out that fit that scope of work, because one paving contractor to another might be very different depending on the equipment they have, what kind of work they do. So that's what we do.
Got it. So obviously I like that approach, that you're kind of driving the bus, if you will, making sure you're getting what you need. And you talked about an asset management strategy. So tell me, I know, I've paid on asset management. I've paid different vendors for concrete and seal coat and asphalt and gravel. I don't think I've done chip seal or some other slurry mixes, though I've come close once or twice. So I have a little bit of knowledge, but I'm not nearly as sharp as you on this. Can you tell us a little bit about those different types of product, when they're appropriate, when they're not? I know, so we just bought a park in Northwest Nebraska where it's always cold. Well, the roads are gravel, but it's a different kind of gravel. It almost looks like asphalt. It's packed and it's thick. And it's a city street, right? Versus where I'm from, and came from in Western Illinois, gravel is inch size white rock gravel that you roll your ankle on. I mean, which parks, I've seen parks like that, right? So can you explain the wide range from rock, gravel to concrete, which I think are the worst and the best, or I guess dirt, but dirt and concrete, and how you guys evaluate those from a long-term asset management strategy?
Absolutely. One first thing we like to do is look at the asset itself. Is it an A, B, C asset? Kind of identify what market it's in, what price point are the lots at, all these kind of financial considerations that I think most owners are looking at. What level asset is this? And then let's build to that level, or are we trying to make it the next level, right? What's the cash flow and what are we trying to do with that? So if depending on where you're at, you got gravel, it's probably treated gravel. There's different treatments you can do, cement treatment, there's sprays, just different things you can do as far as depending on where you're at in the country. There's different gravel treatments that you can put down that'll hold it pretty well together. Now, great questions about chip seal. We see a lot of road slurry. I would put those as comparable type products. The problem that we see with those in mobile home parks is they're not really designed for residential streets in slow moving where you have lots of people turning in, turning out. What happens is the aggregate in those comes out and you get this really rocky finish probably after like a month or two, because those are designed for roadways where cars are moving 35 to 45 miles per hour or higher. And actually what's really rocky eventually gets worn in, and it's part of that curing process and part of how that product operates. We don't recommend it a lot unless you're in a really cold area. It really helps with the snow and traction and ice and things like that where you may have that. There's different products. So one product I would love to actually share with the audience that I think more people can look into is what's called fiber reinforced asphalt. It's a relatively new in the world in that it's only been around for 15 years. There's a company called Fortify that makes a lot of concrete fibers. If you're pouring concrete in colder areas, East Coast, you're probably pouring, I don't know if you're using rebar, if you're just doing fiber asphalt or fiber concrete. So it's used for both concrete and asphalt. But that's a product for overlays or for even just replacement, because we're seeing most mobile home parks we see have really thin asphalt, 2, maybe 3 inches. We've seen some 1 3/4 inches. So you can go up and the fiber will actually help mitigate. So we probably heard maybe Petromat, other paving fabrics that help. The idea here is extending the existing life of the asphalt. How can I extend it? And overlays is that, but the problem is you get reflective cracking. So eventually those cracks will reflect up through. That's what the fabrics are for. Now, fiber reinforced asphalt does a very similar thing and mitigates the reflective cracking, but then it also has higher resistance value. So there's less deterioration from surface erosion and things like that. About the same price, sometimes a little bit more expensive, but it hasn't really made its way into the public sector yet. Into the private sector, I would say actually, where asset managers, you see a lot on highways, roadways, airports, things like that, but it really hasn't made it into like mobile home parks and commercial or industrial. Like Walmart, I think just did their first 40 properties last year with it. Yeah, so it's a newer product, but it can really extend the life of the asphalt by up to 50% more than a traditional overlay.
Interesting. So, I mean, Walmart's probably got a little bigger budget than the average mobile home park owner. Can I assume that the fiber asphalt's more expensive than traditional asphalt?
Yeah, usually it's about a 10 to 15% upcharge.
Okay, yeah. So probably a good value, just more expensive, but a good value overall. And I know from experience, a big part of the cost is kind of the mobilization of getting going. Where, if it's 100 units of asphalt, it's $100, but if it's 200 units of asphalt, it's maybe 120. Because there's obviously overhead, insurance, sales, but also just the mobilization of the crew that, in my world, it's not like I rarely decide, am I going to do half one side of the street? But what I decide is, well, they're already here. Do I want them to do the parking lanes? Do I want them to do driveways? Where like a gravel driveways, we can get gravel driveways for about $100. Concrete's about $1,000 per stall. So most of our customers choose gravel, and sometimes we put gravel in for free. Well, we don't ever put concrete in for free. Maybe on new homes as part of the sales price, but sometimes when the asphalt guy's there, he'll say, "Hey, how about I do 50 asphalt driveways?" And it's 100. It's like, what? It's just cheap as gravel, and it's messier, but it's harder to park. But so tell us how that plays into the strategy. There's obviously quality, where I think concrete's the best, and there's the things like this fiber asphalt that is news to me. This sounds really good. Those are more expensive, but they last longer. How do you on a mobile home park? You're obviously not going to get involved in a $4,000 roadwork job on a mobile park. What's the minimum job size you guys tackle, and how does that work on the mobile home park business in particular?
Yeah, remind me to come back and talk about the mobilization, because
Okay.
there's some key points there. But for us, our average fee is like between $5,000 and $10,000. And that's if we're traveling. If we're local, we have offices in Southern California. I'm in Northern Nevada. So me and my business partner, we kind of divide up, north and south. He goes a lot to Denver, I think, because he likes to go hunting and stuff like that. So he takes on those projects. But
that means a big for mobile park. That means a pretty big job. That means you're talking over $100,000 job, maybe. So which is generally going to be a repave, either a mill and overlay or repave, as opposed to crack seal and seal coat, something like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we always tell people, like, phone calls and emails are always free. But bringing that back to the mobilization and our fee, I think one of the most undervalued opportunities that I see in the market is trying to gain some economies of scale. Most of the owners that I see, especially in the mobile home park spaces, they usually have a territory. I find they have an area where they, in a state or metro area, where they combine, they usually have multiple assets. And if you're going to do asphalt work and you're only going to do 20 or 30,000 at a time, you should really think about trying to coordinate 2 or 3 parks at a time. I don't know a single paving contract especially, that wouldn't give you a price reduction to do even just 2 jobs if they were at least somewhat near each other, within half an hour, an hour. If you're willing to sign that second contract and you can coordinate that with your management teams, we see 5 to 10% savings just on 2 jobs. You start looking at 5, 10, we're seeing 20 to, depending on the size, obviously. If you're going to put $500,000 jobs together, you're not going to see a huge saving. But if you put 5 or 10, 20 to 50 or $100,000 jobs together and bid them out as a package, you're going to see a huge savings.
Got it.
Yeah. So, and that's where we can also help too. So now maybe it helps spread out our fee a little sometimes. We can do $1,500 or $2,500 per property to evaluate and write the bid packages and solicit the bids. We like to make it so that we'll even get we want to make sure people getting their 1-year warranty paperwork, and that you're getting your release of lien after the job as well. Because really, if there's any problem with the installation, you're going to know within the first year. If something goes wrong, if it doesn't get compacted right, or something, the seal coat was too watered down, for example, because the seal comes as a concentrate. I don't know if a lot of people know that. It's a concentrated product, and then you water it. The contractor's supposed to water it down 10 to 15% on average. But a lot of them, they try to make a few extra bucks, and 20, 30% water isn't unseen, and it just won't last. But you'll know within that first 6 months to a year. Once you get through especially with seal, for example, that first wet season, you're going to know right away if it was watered down or not.
Yeah, I've had that happen actually. I didn't realize it was because of overwatering, but I paid, I don't remember, it was like $30,000 for the patching and mill and overlay in certain spots, and then I got another 10 for seal coat, and the seal coat didn't last. It's just like, it went from jet black, looked awesome. 6 months later, it looked gray. Yeah. I was like, what? And then tell me a little bit too. I know from a little bit of experience on like allegations in your asphalt, where you start to see cracks and you start to see the spider web or alligator skin. It really is like the beginning of the end for that portion of the land. At what point? How soon should you remedy that? Should you do like crack sealant or something right away, or should you cut out a patch, like saw cut a patch and fix that? Because that's what I feel like the more common work is in mobile parks, especially smaller parks. So you got 30 lots. It's like you can't really absorb a $50,000 asphalt job. If you got 400 pads, you spend $1 million on asphalt. Well, it just makes the park better. But if you got a 30 pad park, man, you almost want to use cold patch,
Yeah.
you got a Home Depot, but that doesn't last. As you know, snowplow eats it. But, so tell me about that. That's what I'm curious about is the allegations. I just got bids on crack sealant and it's like, man, this is killer.
So that's a great question. The alligatoring, right, is I think, and I'll say this, when I first got in the business, the guy that really trained me presented alligatoring like cancer, right? You got to cut it out and get rid of it, or it's just going to grow. And in my experience, it's actually not really true. It really depends on the age of the asphalt. There's a lot of really good asphalt that's 20 or 30 years old, that's really alligatored, but it hasn't moved. That's what I look for. Has it moved? Is it moving? Do you want to crack fill and seal regularly? I do think it's worth it. There's a lot of studies out there that show that every 3 to 5 years, seal is actually designed as a 2-coat process. So I think a lot of people sell the 1-coat because people will pay for it, but it's really designed as a 2-coat. If you're gonna do patches, the general rule is you gotta go 2 feet past the last crack to make sure, because really what's happening is the subgrade is deteriorating. Asphalt is a wearing surface. Everything's strength comes from the subgrade. What's underneath the asphalt is really going to dictate the life of the asphalt. Like, for example, when I say asphalt is a wearing surface, the city of San Francisco has concrete streets. They overlay them with 2 inches of asphalt to provide a smooth wearing surface. Asphalt isn't the end all be all. If it's cracked and alligator, you got to look at the park and think, is it sinking? Am I getting a pothole? Those are things that I'm willing to say, let's remove and replace. And I would try to find out the thickness of your asphalt. Like I mentioned, 2 inches is what we're commonly seeing. And a mill and inlay at 2 inches is the same as a removal and replacement. So when you're looking at bids, look at that thickness. Is that a common thickness for your area? Because I'll tell you, we see a lot of up to 4 inches. Check the language in the comments. Up to 4 inches. They're not 4 inches.
Right.
In my experience,
I actually called the guy out on that. He was on site, and my bid was 4 inches, and I chose this guy who was a little more expensive than the other guy because the other guy was 2 inches. I said, I'm going to pay 5% more for twice as much asphalt, and I went over and I saw him, and I said, I just looked at that. I can tell. I said, that's not 4 inches. He said, oh, that spot must not be level. I said, let's go look somewhere else, and we put in, and he just looks at me. He's like, how about we just cut today's work in half? I mean, he was just like, it was too late. He'd already been doing his work. He's like, I can't go do everything 4 inches now. I'm just like, wow. I'm sure he gets away with that all the time.
All the time. And if you're not there, so one thing we educate our clients is it's a simple calculation, square foot times thickness times 0.006. It doesn't work everywhere in the country, but you should be within 5 to 10% of how many tons. Asphalt is purchased differently than concrete. You buy concrete by the square yard. You buy asphalt by the ton. So you should be able to calculate your tonnage and know with that equation, you get pretty close and know exactly how much tons so if you're on a job, ask the glass guy at the end of the day for his weight ticket. They calculate the weight throughout the day. So they'll know how many tons on the weight ticket are in that load and how many tons have been delivered to that site for the day.
That's great advice.
Absolutely right. That's one of the things we see all the time. We try to educate owners on. It's like, you're probably not getting the thickness that you're paying for.
No, I saw it myself. I was just like, that's not 4 inches. Like,
yeah.
And the guy caved. I mean, I'm kidding you. He caved on the spot. This was the owner of the company. 50%.
Some guys will tell you you've got alligating. They'll say, here's another like common misconception I get a lot from contractors. You can't mill and inlay that. It'll pulverize. They'll say you'll pulverize the asphalt and break through. We've done a lot of jobs where we've milled 2 inches and new areas were only 2.5 inches thick. And so we broke through. The way they make these grinders now, as long as that substrate is strong, I've never had one break through and cause a huge problem. Never. They try to tell you that that's going to happen, but it usually doesn't. The way they make these grinders and milling machines now, they can break through the asphalt, get to the subgrade, and actually cut it right on grade. and not cause a huge problem. And they can pave right over that. They won't be able to tack it because they want to usually tack it because it's dirt, right? But 2 inches of asphalt is pretty standard. I think most people, unless you have a lot of overlays, the minimum overlay you should get is an inch. That is kind of construction standards. You really don't want to get a fabric. The minimum engineer is 1.5 inches for those fabric overlays, Petromat. And that's the 2 inches ideal on the overlay. So if you're doing an overlay, you're probably doubling your thickness. Be careful about grinding transitions. We looked at this one in Idaho actually recently, and you could tell they just ground the edges and then overlay the middle. So you kind of create a hump, which is sometimes good for water to drain. Right. But what happens is you have a storm drain, and if they don't grind down properly, then what they do is they taper it off from 2 to 0. And that first couple of feet where it gets really thin is just going to break up really quick. So look at the process that they're using as well. Make sure they mill it the full depth thickness all the way to the end. Patches, I feel like we kind of got distracted from the original question on patches. But patches are kind of like as needed, potholes, things like that. Those are the only thing. I don't necessarily look at alligating as a problem. I want to see that should play out over maybe 5 years, 10 years, kind of monitor it, see if it gets worse over the next few years. If you see sinking though or potholes, those isolated areas, I would focus on patches.
Got it. Good information. A couple of things tips I want to share too that I know from what you just said. I had a park, I actually sold the park, but as part of it had a conduit CMBS loan. As part of the property condition assessment, they sent out somebody like yourself to inspect the property, and they required a 2-inch overlay as the minimum on some of the road work. So I know from agency loans too, it's like you can't have gravel roads on those loans. So sometimes if you think about not just your asset management from a capital expenditure and from a kind of a maintenance requirement, but you look like what's my exit strategy for the property? If it's a cash out refinance an agency loan, having better road condition is going to be more important. And then to preserve the roads, a practical step that we always employ. We're closing on a deal next Friday. And the road, there's a parking lot, there's a duplex, and between the duplex and the mobile home park, it's like the entry to the mobile home park is a huge parking lot for some reason. It is absolutely destroyed because they have big dumpsters right there. So the trash trucks, the regular weekly trash trucks to pick up polycart, I don't remember the number, but they weigh like 6,000 pounds. Not too much. They don't do that much damage. The trash truck that picks up the big 10 by 10 dumpster weighs 30,000 pounds. And turns, and we had one in the park, and it just crushed that road. And we just crushed it, and we couldn't get it out of there fast enough. So that's one way to preserve your road is your trash contract and how you work it.
Yeah, gosh, trash trucks keep us in business.
Yeah, you love them. Yeah,
they really do. And that's a good point. I've seen owners that replace and didn't replace it thick enough or didn't address the substrate issue, and so 5 years, 10 years later, they're replacing it again because the trash truck just hammers it. One suggestion that we make regularly in that is see if you can pulverize your existing asphalt. If you have a thinner section or you have good elevation, you don't necessarily have to remove and replace it. You could just pulverize it, mix that asphalt in with the top 3 or 4 inches of whatever your substrate is. It'll bind together usually really well and create a new, stronger substrate, and then you can pave on top of that. So that's another solution we've seen work really well in that particular situation with the trash trucks. They cause a lot of damage.
Yeah. Another thing, when you talk about the elevation there, the extra substrate, it made me think of from the legal side. Make sure you don't have too big a drop offs on the side. I've seen it where people get it seems like 6 inches, and it's at the cliff, but it's not a curve where people see it's just like a cliff hidden in the grass. So that's not good. But one thing that I think is good is if you get kind of like we're talking about mobilization, the asphalt guys, if they're out there, they can do speed bumps pretty immediately, pretty easily versus having to do speed bumps. I think it's like, if you do a speed bump, all guy to do 10 speed bumps, he's going to want $1,500 a pop. But if you do 10 speed bumps while you're doing your road, he's like, how about $100? Yeah. It's not that much work. And I've had them cut. I've had to saw cut personally before you put down to create gaps in the middle of them so that water can flow on a very flat park. But if the guy's put the speed bump in, he can leave a little spacer there and leave a gap in your speed bump, not wide enough that you can roll an ankle, but narrow enough that it lets water through. I've got one part in particular where it's just like perfectly flat everywhere. Well, then the water accumulates at the speed bumps.
Yeah. So yeah, one solid speed bump, you've got two. Sometimes they're angled. We notice instead of being flat, sometimes they'll be angled a little bit so that water will flow through them. You do have to worry about the elevations. A good contractor will either like mill or grade those areas so that even if you just have to move things around so there is a nice smooth transition. That's one thing we're working on one in Washington, and they have the speed bumps currently, but we're going to pulverize the whole thing. And so what we're going to do is kind of change the elevation a little bit. And it's an old, I was in there for 3 days doing the evaluation, doing some testing. And I noticed a lot of people in, mobile vehicle, like vehicles, like not vehicles, but I'm trying to think.
Golf carts,
things like that. We looked at, we're going to offset and provide like a 5-foot path on one side, so that people with strollers or have medical disabilities that use carts or golf carts, they can get around a little bit more smoothly, and water can flow as well. So we're going to kind of combine those two options together in that regard.
Great, good shit.
Thinking about the comfort of the tenants, I think too, especially when scheduling, like how can we make it as easy as possible for both the tenant and get the work done? That's usually never a fun process.
Oh, I know, it's the worst. Yeah, it's the worst.
But if you have a good plan, I think most people are usually pretty excited at the end of the work because it does kind of rejuvenate the park.
It's huge. I mean, it's just not inexpensive. I say painting program is a great way to change the culture. Bringing new homes is a way to change the culture. Putting in roads is a great way to change the culture. It's probably the most expensive way to do it, but it definitely is an overnight change. For sure.
I would encourage folks to keep costs down. Look at even patches mill and inlay, unless it's really sinking or have huge structural deficiencies. Just because you see alligator doesn't mean you have to remove and replace it. That is not true. And there are some cheaper options with mill. Like I said, we do a lot of mill and inlay, and that's what Walmart's doing. That's what Target are doing. These other large asset owners, they're not doing patches anymore. Even on small, they're not doing the whole parking lot, but they understand that the thickness isn't what the contractors usually say it is, and that a 2-inch mill and inlet might be actually the same as a removal replacement at the end of the day.
Great stuff, Scott. I appreciate your insights. Any more tips before we let you go? And if not, where can people find you?
Tips. Again, I'll go back to try to combine projects, especially if you have smaller parks, if they're near each other. Even if you're looking at your CapEx strategy, try to put those 2-3 years together, or find a year where you could do 2 or 3 at a time. You'll save a lot of money, a little bit more coordination time, but I think you'll get a much bigger bang for your buck. You can find me a lot on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out most days because I can't really deal with any of the other social media sites currently with our State of the Union. So I stick to LinkedIn. Scott Jolly, I think Scott G. Jolly, I don't know off the top of my head. Site Consulting Specialist is the name of our company. We're launching a new series, Building Cap Experts, and it's kind of a pun on the actual building and building up people, just educating people on different products and resources out there. Really, another tip I would say is check out that fiber reinforced asphalt. It could save a lot of money, and not both now and in the future. That's probably it. Site Consulting Specialist .com is our website, and we are the cap experts. Yeah.
All right, Scott, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferd.
Bye now.